welcome to the Tres Vista Talk podcast, where we engage with senior asset managers and advisors across a broad range of topics. Tres Vista is the leading outsourcing firm for the financial services industry, supporting over 1,000 clients with over 10 trillion in assets under management.
Hello, this is Abhilash Jayakumar, co-founder and managing director of Tres Vista. On today's Tres Vista Talk podcast, I have the privilege of speaking with Ken Marlin. Ken is the founder and managing member of Marlin Associates and the author of The Marine Corp's Way to Win on Wall Street, 11 Key Principles from Battlefield to Boardroom. Over the course of more than 30 years, Ken has advised scores of U.S. and international financial technology, data, and analytics firms on the best ways to buy, sell, grow, and thrive. Along the way, he's been an entrepreneur 3 times, a tech company CEO twice, a senior corporate executive twice, and an investment banker. Nearly 20 years ago, Ken embarked on a journey to create a different sort of investment bank, one that would meld the investment banking skills he learned over 20 years on Wall Street with lessons he learned as a tech entrepreneur and the principles that he learned during the decade he spent on active duty as a U.S. Marine Corps infantry officer. Today, Marlin Associates is one of the most active M&A advisors in the IT arena, having advised on over 200 transactions in over 26 countries. Ken, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You have a really interesting background in how you got to where you are today. You had a very long career in the Marine Corps. Thank you so much for your service. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that experience?
I could talk for hours about that experience. When you're 19, 20 years old, experiences like that become formative and, in many ways shaped who I am today. I had somebody say to me one time, so you're applying everything you learned in the Marine Corps to business, right? I said, well, not exactly. I mean, I learned how to field strip a machine gun and not to stop in a kill zone. And neither one of those things really are particularly relevant to my current life. But I did learn many things that are applicable, many of which I didn't realize were applicable until later on. But I have come to appreciate the ability to leverage some skills and some tricks that I learned while I was in the Marine Corps and use them in the business world.
Yeah, we hire a lot of young professionals right out of college, as many financial service firms do, and I often advise them focus on transferable skills. Right? Nobody knows exactly what they'll be doing 10, let alone 20 years down the road. But there are a lot of skills that people can develop that can be applied towards any number of industries or situations. And you mentioned that you didn't quite appreciate that you were learning these skills. And I kind of describe it as the Karate Kid, the original one, not the newer one with Will Smith's son. But, he's waxing the cars and painting the fences and not realizing he's learning karate at the same time. What are some of those transferable skills that you feel you picked up early in your career that have been really valuable as you progressed?
So some things are skills and some things are probably tricks. So skills, clearly there are a couple that Marines teach you. The Marines are taught ways to operate independently in small groups, and it's trite to talk about leadership. You see a lot of books about leadership, and people say they learn to be leaders in various ways. It is to some extent about team building. Marine platoon commanders carry a pistol in a holster at their hip, and there's a saying that says, if you ever have to take that pistol out of the holster and shoot bad guys, you've failed. Your weapon is your platoon or your company. That's who you're supposed to organize. They're the ones supposed to be killing bad guys. You're supposed to be organizing, leading, motivating them. And prior to the time you ever got in that situation, you're supposed to have trained them and put them in a position where they can win. And so figuring out how to build a team, train a team, motivate a team, lead a team so that they know what to do and they do it well is something that takes a while to appreciate. And I say some things are tricks; that's different. The Marine Corps has a concept called backwards planning. The idea is start with when you want to be someplace. You want to land on a beach, or you want to be in Berlin. What do you have to do in order to be there? What has to happen the day before, and the day before that, and the day before that, and the day before that, and you backwards plan based on some objective you have. And I have found that trick to be very useful in the mergers and acquisitions world.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. You wrote this book, The Marine Corps Way to Win on Wall Street, and it got great reviews, inspired many of your readers. What inspired you to write the book?
A fair question that my wife asked me as I was holed up in front of the computer virtually every weekend for a couple of years. It started not exactly as a book. It started quite some time ago, early in my career, when I was faced with some challenges and I was trying to figure out what to do. And I realized that I could apply Marine Corps principles and solve the problem. That's a whole other podcast. It had to do with the divesting Dun & Bradstreet out of 3 businesses that were in South Africa at a time when everybody knew we had to sell these businesses. And I was talking to people about the fact that I was leveraging these skills that I had learned while I was in the Marine Corps, and it was working somewhat to my surprise. And they said, you really ought to write a book about it, write articles about it. And so I started thinking about ideas, and I just had a file on my computer cleverly called book. And every time I got an idea, I would see an article that I thought was relevant. I would throw it into the file. At some point, I thought maybe there's enough for a book there, and I spent a couple of days organizing what I had put in there into logical themes that eventually became 11 chapters in the book, although there were a lot of steps in between. But it was about a 3-year process of writing the book, but it was a several-year process before that of thinking about writing the book.
Perhaps for the audience benefit, what are the key principles and practices that one would take from your book that you would recommend?
The book goes through 11 traits, and I'll bore everybody by trying to go through all 11 of them. But some of the key ones start with the idea of having an objective, because if you don't have an objective, there is no road that'll get you to where you want to be. And I see this all the time. I see it in the merger and acquisition world. I see someone who wants to acquire a business. And, we're talking to a fairly large company right now that wants to do acquisitions. And it's like, to what end? What is the ultimate objective? Because if we can't clearly define that objective, then we don't understand the tactics to use to get you there. And as a corollary to that, which is that once you understand the objectives, the idea that all of your tactics need to be oriented towards achieving that objective, and you need to use discipline to not let yourself get diverted. I used to run a tech company, and we would have salespeople come all the time who would say, so such and such client would buy the product if only we would add this feature, this functionality to it. And that is a never-ending no-win situation, because there is an infinite number of features and functionality you could add to tech products. We had to figure out, where are we going? Where do we want to be with the product in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years? And only add the features and functionality that were going to get us there. Otherwise, we'd never get there, which sometimes meant saying no to a client and saying, this is what we have, this is the plan. We'll probably get to that feature you're looking for, but it's in the roadmap for 14 months from now. A slight corollary to that is something someone told me a long time ago. Discipline and focus is not about what you do. It's about what you don't do. It's about the ability and willingness to say no. Um, there are a number of other principles in the book. One I call seek foreign entanglements. We are in an interconnected world. And to deny that is to sub-optimize your business. And we take that approach with the investment bank. I've taken that approach in leading other businesses. We don't define our mandate geographically. Now, we may have a client, if you have a client that's dealing with the U.S. health insurance business, that may well be a U.S. business, but we have many other clients that are dealing with a world that's not defined geographically, and we don't want to be defined geographically for them. And the result of that is that about half of our transactions have involved a non-U.S. party. About a third of our clients have been based outside of the United States. And the others are U.S. clients that with which we've had a non-U.S. counterparty. There's a chapter on negotiating that also came out of Marine Corps experience. But key to that is the idea that you cannot negotiate if the other side perceives that you are unwilling to walk from the table. If the other side perceives you're unwilling to walk from the table, you are no longer negotiating, you are begging. Oh, please do the right thing. Oh, please, here's the logic why you should do it. The other side perceives you're not willing to walk from the table. It amazes me how many people agree with that in principle, but when they actually get to negotiating, they are afraid to walk from the table, and sometimes you need to do that. So there are quite a number of principles in there that, by the way, are applicable to a wide range of businesses, not just Wall Street businesses.
Yeah, your point on focusing on objectives, I can resonate with that one. The number of times I see folks disagreeing, arguing, whether in a team or across the table, you realize they're arguing about strategies when their underlying assumption of what the objective is different. And you can't argue on a strategy when the different parties have different objectives. And often people don't take the time to start a conversation saying, what are we trying to achieve? Right? Are we trying to achieve the same thing? And I think that's really important for people to pause when they get into these conflict situations to see what are they arguing about. Maybe you can switch gears a little bit. I'd love to talk a little bit about Marlin Associates. Can you maybe give us a background of how you started the firm and how it's evolved, and what are you guys really focused on today?
I'd like to claim that everything we do is strategic, but it's amazing how much of life is more serendipitous. I back up a little bit. While I was in the Marine Corps, I did my MBA, and I focused a lot on corporate strategy as part of my MBA. I did ultimately get hired by Dun & Bradstreet at a time when Dun & Bradstreet was being operated like a private equity firm. It had, over the time I was there, we did 100 acquisitions and divestitures. There were 23 different divisions, and I was initially brought in a troubleshooting role under the chief financial officer, but eventually did get to do strategy and mergers and acquisitions. Along the way, as I was doing strategy, mergers and acquisitions, I got to see a lot of investment banks. We had Goldman Sachs on retainer for large deals. We worked with a lot of smaller investment banks who brought us acquisition opportunities. And I started to think that would be a cool thing to do, to work particularly for one of these boutique investment banks, but I really had no clue how one would do it, how one would move into the role. I liked the idea of being an investment banker in one of these boutiques, but didn't know how to make that move. The common theme at Dun & Bradstreet of a lot of these businesses were B2B technology-driven businesses. And it was a great education for me on those kinds of businesses and on the ecosystems around them. Increasingly, I spent time around companies that were selling technology-enabled services and data into the financial services community. We owned Moody's, the bond rating agency. We owned a company called Interactive Data, which was bought a few years ago by ICE for $5 billion. We owned a UK company called DataStream, and I was doing more and more strategy around that ecosystem. Eventually, I left Dun & Bradstreet. Dun & Bradstreet started taking itself apart and selling off those different divisions. There's a whole other podcast we can do. I tried to buy one of those divisions, had private equity backing and the like. It didn't work. I got outbid. I left Dun & Bradstreet. I ran a B2B fintech firm called Telecors that was owned by a bunch of Swiss banks. I bought a piece of that eventually after a few years, formed a company called Telesphere. I'm sorry, this is all audio and not visual. I just looked down and realized I have a Telesphere mouse pad under my elbow here. I did some acquisitions, raised for Telesphere. I raised debt capital. I raised equity capital for myself. I tell people I've never been as focused on what it says in these purchase and sale agreements as when it was my own money. And eventually sold Telesphere to Bridge, which later got acquired by Reuters. And I got a call from one of those boutique investment banks that I had first met with back in my Dun & Bradstreet days, after I had sold Telesphere, to say, would I like to come to them and lead their practice that would be focused on many of the same kinds of B2B tech-enabled businesses that I had been dealing with at D&B, at Telecors, at Telesphere. And I suddenly said, ooh, this is a way to get into that business. And it worked. 99 was a year in which the dot-com craze was high. The internet companies were high. There were lots of deals being done. I made money. Middle of March of 2000, NASDAQ crashed. Tech markets crashed. Nobody was doing deals. 2001, some people flew airplanes into buildings. The economy was in the tank. Didn't make much money in 2000. Didn't make much money in 2001. I thought if I was ever going to start my own boutique investment bank, that would be timing. Now, I made some assumptions. One was the market had been down in 2000 and 2001, so it must be coming back soon, like 2002, and I thought it would be good timing. It was lousy timing. 2002 wasn't any good either. Neither was 2003. That was the beginning of 2002, and the rest is history.
Well, that's fantastic. Now, so you've been through disruption and dislocation and turned it into an opportunity. Where do you see the opportunity coming out of this current disruption?
I have a lot of great theses based on my crystal ball. The question is, will my crystal ball be more accurate than it's been sometimes in the past? I think that this is a very serious disruption that we're going through right now. And just as there are a lot of restaurants that will survive this, there are also a lot of restaurants that won't survive, a lot of small businesses that will survive, but a lot that won't. I think that there are disruptions, some of the disruptions that's going on, and by the way, I'll come back to this, but the same applies to investment banks, law firms, accounting agencies. There are some trends that have been going on for a long time, that the pandemic has just accelerated. You take shopping, for example. People have been moving to online shopping for quite a long time, and that's put pressure on some kinds of retail stores, not all. And, the pandemic has sort of accelerated that. I think there's been a movement in the investment banking world to more uses of technology for a long time, and the pandemic has simply accelerated that. Some of these trends they're never going back to where they were. I think my personal crystal ball is that this disruption is not going to be over soon. I think that we have another 2 years anyway of disruption going on. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't mean to say that it'll be exactly the way it is now, with countries shut down, with everybody required to wear masks everywhere. I think a lot of those things will change as people get better at treating COVID and as vaccines are developed. But I do think that, look, it actually took 2 years for New York to come back to a semblance of normality after 9/11. We came back quicker from the disruptions after the housing crisis of 2008 and 9, but it still took a year. I think this one will easily take another 2 years, during which many small boutique investment banks, accounting firms, law firms will not survive. I think we are in a very good position to survive and perhaps to thrive. We will see. Part of it is use of technology. We've been very strong believers in using technology and outsourcing since the outset. We have no IT department, it's outsourced. We have no finance department, it's outsourced. All of our billing, all of our accounting. We use professional employment organizations, PEO, to manage all of our HR efforts, our payroll, everything we have ever been able to outsource, we've always outsourced. And that stands us in good stead now. We're also big believers in technology. So we were already in the cloud. All of our files are in the cloud. We have VPN access to everything. So we have been in a great position to sort of move out of the office and into people's home offices and continue working largely without interruption. The one challenge is that any sales process, person-to-person contact is way better than person-to-Zoom contact. So our business is down a bit from last year, but we're busy. And I think we can sustain that, whereas I'm not sure everyone else can. So right now I'm feeling pretty optimistic about 2020 and 2021. And I do think we're going to continue to have disruption through 2021.
Yeah. You talked about outsourcing, and obviously that's the business we're in, and we're seeing a lot more interest now than we had in the past, because people are also redefining what are their core competencies. Maybe you built an IT team once upon a time because you thought you had to, or a finance department or an analyst bench. But as people are in this remote environment, they really think about what is our business really and what do we need to have in-house versus being able to outsource. Now, pardon the pun, but I'd like to change gears and talk about your race car driving hobbies. Just kind of to close, it's an interesting thing that I learned about you recently. Can you share with us a little bit how you got into race car driving and how someone who doesn't do it but is excited by the egg get into it?
Once again, I'm not sure that it was particularly strategic. I've always liked the idea of race cars. Another one of those things where A, I didn't know how to get into it, and B, I couldn't afford it. I bought a used street Ferrari, 20 years ago. It wasn't one of those high-end $1 million ones. It was an older one, and I had this my wife bought me a one of these 5-day race schools at a nearby track, and I then tried to take that sort of used street Ferrari that I had and take it on the track, and I quickly realized that all I accomplished was burning up $2,000 worth of tires. Street cars are not meant to run on tracks. And I was talking to a local mechanic who fixes sports cars, and he had a used Ferrari race car in his shop minus an engine. That's kind of an important part. Somebody had owned, blown engines twice, decided didn't want to do that anymore, said sell the thing. The mechanic had sourced another engine, and I said, okay, let's give that a shot. And that got me into racing. And then I had to go learn how to race and go to race schools and found a race series. And I've been racing cars now for about 15 years.
Well, if you ever want a rush, try driving in Bombay. It's a whole different type of driving experience if you like thrills. You won't get speed, though.
I've not been to Bombay. I have been to Mumbai, and that's scary enough. Not to Mumbai, to Delhi. I've been to Delhi.
You have to deal with road rage in Delhi.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Ken, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I wish you guys the best of luck.
You as well. Thank you to the audience. Take care.
And with that, we come to the end of this episode of the Tres Vista Talk podcast. Thank you to our listeners, and we would love for you to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you access podcasts. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter to stay updated on additional content. To know more about how we support our clients on due diligence, business development, portfolio management, fund administration, data analytics, and other areas, feel free to visit our website and reach out to us at www.resista.com. Any information, opinions, and recommendations presented by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of their firms or Tres Vista and should not be constituted as investment advice.